Welcome to the Observatory Podcast.
With your hosts, Scott and Loray Wright.
Join us each week as we explore living life from the inside out. Welcome back to the Observatory Podcast. Today, Ray and I sit down with our good friend, David Dawson. We did a podcast on his podcast, which is called Inner, I-N-N-E-R, Connection. And we really enjoyed that time that we had with him. So we invited him to come on here. We got to know him a little bit better, hear a little bit about his story and his journey. And this is a really beautiful conversation. So I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with David Dawson. Welcome back to the Observatory Podcast. We are sitting here today in our living room once again, Ray and I, with David Dawson.
Hi, David.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
We were just on his podcast not too long ago, and we published that one that he did where he was questioning us on ours. And we asked him to come on so we could ask him some questions and get to know him a little bit better because, we kind of did all the talking last time.
Yes, we did.
Well, this will be a role reversal because I am not usually in the seat that I am currently in. I'm usually...
A hot seat.
Yeah. Well, even in my work, I'm always just firing off questions. And there's definitely a defense mechanism there because then the attention's not on me. But I love to learn from people.
Yeah. Yeah. And we really enjoyed the podcast that we did with you before because, like we were saying just before we started here, some of the questions that you asked were really opening and helped us to go to some places we hadn't gone before. So, yeah, you do a great job.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you here. The Inner
Action
Podcast. So look that up, and we'll put links in the show notes and everything for people to find that as well.
That's great. Yeah, I-N-N-E-R, because sometimes people might look up the actual word, interaction.
Right.
So it's a little play on words.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So as we begin, before we delve into questions or whatever, we want to get to know you a little bit.
Great.
So just kind of tell us about yourself a little.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
Well, I am at the ripe midlife crisis age of 40. I turned that this...
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And that has brought up a lot of beautiful and challenging, reflective, just things in my life that I am really eager to start to just get into and expose more and more as I do my platform on the podcast. Because my big thing is I don't want to ever sit in the seat of the host and say, I have life figured out.
Right.
I don't want people to ever think that I am not on the journey as much as they are.
Yeah.
And I want to always remain as humble and as just interested and curious about life as I can be. And one of the big things for me as I've started to do this, and it's been about 5 years since I've really been interested in looking at myself more seriously. Mm-hmm. And up until that point, it was so much more external validation, looking for these external things to really show my self-worth, and realizing more and more my self-worth should not be tied to my net worth. And talking to people, and we'll get into this as well because I'm a hairdresser full-time. The podcast is not at all a monetary platform for me.
We understand.
But for me, there's actually something really pure in that because I'm doing it for my own creative outlet. I'm doing it because the people that I talk to on a daily basis, I'm getting a peek into their lives and living vicariously through them. And it gives me perspective. It allows for me to start to learn and get outside of my own bubble that we're all winging it. And the more I can be intrigued and just say, okay, tell me more. What have you learned now that you're 60 years old? What would you do that is slightly tweaked from what you actually ended up doing? And most people say experiences over things, and to cherish every single moment, because when you look back on it, you wish that you were there.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, we love the ambition of a podcast to just create community in that conversation. it's, I think, one of the best tools that someone can actually go on, like have that be part of their journey.
Yeah, that's been something, there's been many, many reasons why I initially started, but as I've begun it, I'm very early on. I've started not even 3 months ago, and it is evolved, which I think is a beautiful process, but also I'm realizing more and more as I've reflected on why I chose certain things. The thing that I'm almost most excited about is the connections and the relationships that this type of platform will enable me to get access to that would be really difficult otherwise. And all of the experiences like this one would never probably come up had I not started it.
Yeah.
And the fact that, oh man, I'm beginning to actually, create a life that is much more rich and much more rewarding than if I am just constantly thinking only about myself. Because one of the big reasons for the podcast is I've been seeing the struggle that clients are going through in their daily life, and that's something that's beautiful about being hairdressers or unlicensed therapists. And we are these non-biased third parties that get to peer into their life, and they open up about the most amazing things. I feel very honored. And something that's unique about our space is it's just me and the client. There's no one else in the space.
Mm-hmm.
And so that creates a bit of privacy. When I was working in a very busy salon, the beginning part of my career, the conversations were always quite surface because everyone's eavesdropping on everyone else's conversations. And that's fun. There's some cool energy there. But it wasn't until we started getting to our own space that we really decided and noticed, like, wow, this is so much more enlightening, and we're getting to know people on a deeper level, and we're learning so much more. And there's so much more than just giving this service of, what length do you want your haircut today, and sending them on their way. It's not just this transactional thing. It's I've had so many people say, I want to pay you, I would love to pay you extra for the therapy today.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so it's just one of those things where I just feel very, very honored, and my wife will say the same thing, is just we love getting to know people, and we want to share where we're at too. Just be like, hey, we are just doing what we can, and we're falling short, but also it's this beautiful mess that we get to call life.
That's very good.
Yeah. So you said your wife, does she do the same kind of work too?
She does.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we've been doing hair side by side for quite a while.
Wow. That's cool. I don't know if I've ever heard of a couple doing that together.
Yeah, we have a wild story.
Do you do it at your home or?
Yeah, so we retrofitted our detached garage into our studio.
Uh-huh.
And that is, I had never planned on doing that because I had this misconception and conditioning that, a in-house beautician is somehow less than.
Right.
That it's not desirable, that it can't be something that is chic, that it is, looked down on.
Well, the way you describe it, it's like it's more intimate and it opens up a space for deeper.
Sure. Well, and that's
a lot more than a haircut.
Yeah.
Right?
And as I've gotten older, it's like, well, and this will tie into the podcast and everything like that. It's like, well, we all have distorted lenses based off of our conditioning.
For sure.
And I had a very distorted lens on what an at-home business could look like.
Yeah.
And as I gained more footing and more confidence in myself and saw a possibility and leaned into that, it's like, well, why can't we do that? And there was still a lot of embarrassment at first, being like, yeah, we work out of our detached garage, and what what people might be imagining when I say that. And I usually will just leave it at that because I'm sitting in my own discomfort and I have to realize that's me. And I don't know what they're actually thinking.
Right.
But for a while there, I would try to scramble and be like, oh, well, it's like this space that we've really like retrofitted and it's really comfortable and this, that, and the other. And it was me.
Validation.
Yes, yes. And so as I've begun to let go of those things more and more, I can just enjoy what people actually are experiencing while witnessing what I'm experiencing and not trying to project that onto them and manipulate what they might be trying to think.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those moments when we sit with our own discomfort and are actually aware of it, right? And then we become really curious about it and start to explore it. And tug on those threads that unweave stories that we've carried for a very long time.
Yeah. Oh man. So the very first week that we opened up that salon, I'm sitting there and I'm reflecting going, man, my life has never been so convenient, but why am I unhappy? And it was in that moment that I realized if I continue to chase down this path of achievement, and my happiness is tied to the achievement fully, I'll never be happy. And so that is when I put myself back into therapy shortly after that. And part of it also had to do with just where my marriage was at the time, where I was constantly pointing the finger, always wanting my wife to change, and realizing the only person I can control is myself. Mm-hmm. And so how do I want to conduct myself from here on out? From there, I still have a long way to go when it comes to conducting myself very well, but also it was just a wake-up call.
At least you're aware of it. I mean, I look at myself. There was a long period of time in my life where I just walked around completely unaware of that. I'm much more aware now, and again, still working on it. But it's something that you have to even be willing to look at, where it's hard to get to that place sometimes.
Yeah, having a spouse too, they're usually really good at
Yes.
pointing out those things that you might need to work on.
I can't disagree.
Yeah.
In a loving way, of course.
Oh, absolutely. It's the mirror, It's the
Totally
ultimate
Yes.
mirror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so from that moment, it's been amazing on the things that have unfolded since I made that decision to start focusing on myself more than anyone else. And that is part of, the podcast as well. Like, it's called Interaction. It's how our thoughts, our beliefs, our conditioning, how that really affects how we interpret and interact with the world. Mm-hmm. And the one relationship you're guaranteed to have the rest of your life is the one with yourself. And it's the only one that you can control.
And can't get away from.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Every relationship you ever will have other than yourself is, can walk away for a time. And it's not going to be permanent, at least sometimes in this realm. And so that was something that I've been thinking a lot about is, am I kind to myself? To what degree are my thoughts thinking and imagining worst case scenario versus best case scenario?
Yeah. I know for me, it became really eye-opening when I started to realize that every relationship that I had was actually an extension of the one I had with myself. That none of them were independent of me. And I know that sounds like really obvious, but it's much deeper than that. It's like the way I show up, the thoughts that I hold, the interactions, all of that weaves this relationship with someone else that would be completely different if I change any of my own activities. And so when I was seeing that some relationships weren't as I wanted them, and I was like, I just don't know why they can't be this way, or why they can't do this. And then I started to think, well, how am I impacting that? And so I started really paying attention to how I showed up with people and how I started to change. And it's been fascinating how so many of those relationships have just blossomed all through me changing in relationship to them, and really nothing, very little to do with them. Their changes have come about because of my changes.
Yeah.
Their response to me, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm like, man, that took me a long time to learn that. And there's still times when I'll catch myself on autopilot and I'll be like, oh, wait, why am I doing this? Because sometimes in the business setting especially, I can get on autopilot really quickly, and then I have to catch myself because suddenly the relationship starts feeling very contrived or mundane, or less of a relation, more like a transaction.
Transactional, just like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's because of the way I'm showing up.
Yeah. I love this quote. It says, have you ever realized and recognized that every relationship issue you have, you're involved?
Exactly.
Right.
What's the common denominator,
Yeah,
right?
You, right? And so that takes a lot of, humility to kind of say like, ooh, what am I doing that's adding to this, and taking some full responsibility for how you show up. And a lot of times too, we also think that the relationship is completely determined by how the other person views us, but it's actually how much we actually view the other person.
Yeah.
Right. I have a saying that I tell people all the time, and Scott and I talk a lot about this, about meeting people where they're at. And I used to, when I first said it, it was more about having an awareness where someone else is and not having an expectation. But the more that we do that, it's actually allowing, this is so crazy, but we say we're meeting them where they're at, but we're actually allowing them to meet us where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just fascinating how some of those things can look so outside of you when in fact they're just a mirror of you or an aspect of you that either you're aware of or you're not. You either have consciousness around it and intention, or it's just a sleeping part of you that you don't know until you start to know.
Well, when you start to accept that as well, there's a lot of compassion, because you can't change what you don't know and what you can't see. Right. And so, do you know who Young Pueblo is?
Yes.
Have you had any of his books?
Yeah, we have.
That?
Yeah, we did. We have that one gray one that the very first one that he wrote.
Okay, but I love
Becoming. Maybe was it called?
I don't know if I have that one.
Yeah.
But he says, have you ever noticed that whenever you want to change someone, you want them to act more like you? It's just this one thing that you're like, why are you doing it this way? You should do it my way. And your way isn't necessarily the best way. And so just realizing how much we are trying to use control to make ourselves comfortable, and how exhausting that can be.
Yeah. And keep it familiar and really try to manage the amount of change that we initiate.
Yeah.
But the world is constantly changing, whether we know it or not. We are constantly changing, whether we accept it or are aware of it. Every day we change.
When we talked in the previous podcast, I mentioned that one of the things that I had been working on was letting go of my need to be right.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that?
Oh yeah, I got that from another podcast too. I loved that.
Yeah, but that one thing opened me up to such deeper conversations, because that was one thing. I think it's our natural tendencies to want to be right, and so in that space of wanting to be right or feel secure or feel safe or whatever, we don't open ourselves up to be curious about perhaps another pathway here that it might not be the same, but it also might be leading to a deeper place, or a place where you can be more curious, or you can ask different questions and see what it is that you need to see. And I've had lots of those kinds of experiences lately, letting go of that need. And again, an ongoing process. But noticing when that comes up for me, it's like I can feel in myself when someone says something and that I know is, doesn't align with my way of seeing it. I can now catch myself and say, let's just listen to this. Let's just be curious. The fifth agreement from Don Miguel Ruiz is to be skeptical but learn to listen.
Oh, I haven't learned the fifth agreement, so thank you.
It's a separate book. It's really good.
So being skeptical is fine, but also you got to let go of your need to be right in that, so that you can actually listen to what someone else is saying and see what you can glean from that, or add to, or augment, or whatever way you're seeing things, if that makes sense.
Well, one thing when you're saying that reminds me of is we don't have to adopt everyone's viewpoint 100%. We can take that and say, okay, I like this is from a friend of mine, who is like, yeah, we don't have to take the whole thing. We can take 10% and see how that fits, and will that jive with where I'm currently at, and then maybe not completely throw it out too, and just maybe let it sit in the back burner, because at some point it might.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. So David, tell me, when you decided that you were going to go back to therapy, that there was something else that you wanted to work on and have a strong intention around that, what were the biggest changes that you started to see that maybe were prompted by therapy, but that maybe didn't necessarily require therapy? It more just needed your attention to it and commitment to it.
And I have just an addition to that. Like, when was this?
Okay, I'll answer when was this first. This was so we moved into our salon December 31st of 2020. And at that time, not 2020, 2019.
Oh, so pre-COVID.
So pre-COVID, yeah. and at this point, I was just kind of shooting from the hip. I'm like, I think more people are going to be working from home. I think with this hybrid work situation with technology, we have a lot of tech companies here, that this is going to be much more of a viable way of doing your career and whatnot. And little did I know, in 3 months it was going to be
blow up.
Yeah. And so at that point I was extremely grateful for an at-home business.
Sure.
I didn't have to rely on, anyone else other than where we were at. So
no one could tell you to close the doors because you weren't necessary.
And you could decide how you wanted to allow people to come in and kind of that whole governance around that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was really nice too. Most people, because we work by ourselves, we weren't working together. There was that safety that people felt. And then also so many people reached out like, hey, I would just love a haircut. I just want to get out of my house. I want some sort of normal life interaction. And we would like, we will love to do it. If you're comfortable, we'll make sure that you're safe and enjoying the process.
That's great.
And then, Loray, I forget what your question was.
So I said, once you started therapy and you were seeing kind of what therapy was helping you figure out, at what point did you realize it was less about, and therapy can be many things for many people, but that the work was yours to do, that deeper dive into self?
Yeah. So one of the big things, I first started with hypnotherapy because I was recommended by a client of mine, and I just started to roll with it. It was one of these things like, oh, she's really difficult to get into. And I was, hey, this is an opportunity. Let me reach out. And she had an opening and we started working, and I was very resistant for quite a while. It was uncomfortable. It was over the phone, but something started to come through a lot more. And at the same time, I had a dear friend who was opening up a lot about his psychedelic use, specifically with MDMA, with just working through certain things in his marriage and with himself. And something he said was, it's like doing months of therapy in one session. And that really resonated with me because I had done therapy in the past, and I have, being myself, can't speak for anyone else, I have a lot of guards up, a lot of insecurities, especially from a young age, of not feeling masculine enough, comparing myself to these action figures or these movie stars that are these, iconic masculine roles, looking in the mirror and being like, ooh, that's not me. And then utilizing this hatred or this fear or this judgment to start to do things that were quite healthy, let's say exercise or try to eat better. But the underlying tone was, I don't like myself. I'm not enough. Mm-hmm. I'm a failure.
Coming from a negative place.
Yes. Yeah. And so, even when I would get any sort of progress, what was fueling that just perpetuated it at the same time, because I wasn't coming from a place that was accepting or loving. And so that is what really started to change and shift a little bit, is what is my relationship to myself? How do I actually view myself? Why is that the case? And when I did my first MDMA session, I had, up to that point, I had never done anything. I took one puff of cannabis in like high school, but other than that, alcohol's never been a thing. And so I had no idea what altered was. But the biggest thing that I realized is I was so afraid of letting go of control. Mm-hmm. And because of, well, what is this going to feel like? What is this going to be? What's going to come up? Because with MDMA, it's quite a connecting, heart-opening medicine. And in this space, it was a group setting, and I knew no one except for my one friend. And I thought it was going to be he and I that were going to be kind of coming together and talking through some stuff and opening up. But up to that point, I'd never really been very open about my circumstances and how I viewed myself. And I had so much anxiety and so much trepidation of being seen by actually expressing myself. and I got sick. And all I wanted to do, I curled up in the fetal position. I just wanted to go home.
After the medicine?
No, as I was dropping in.
Oh.
Because I was losing control.
Oh, yeah.
And so I excuse myself. I go into a room and I'm laying on my side, and all I'm hearing is everyone else starting to drop in and have conversations. Everyone else is connecting. People are, I hear a little bit of laughter. I hear some happiness, and I'm in the corner just being like, this was a mistake. I don't want to be here. I want to go home. How long is this going to last? And
please let this end.
Yeah,
now.
Please let this end. And as I'm sitting there, I had this little image of an avocado, actually, which is, I don't know why an avocado, but an avocado appeared in my in my eyes, and I was like, oh, and it started just to be peeled away. The skin started to be peeled away, and immediately it was a symbolic for me. It's like, you're going to be peeling away this protective layer that you've had, and you're going to be exposing a very vulnerable, fleshy part of yourself that is necessary, but all the nutrients are there. They're not on the exterior. And at that point, someone had, I noticed that other people weren't feeling the best either. And that had some comfort for me, because I was like, okay, I'm not alone in feeling this way.
The discomfort. Yeah.
Yes. And then someone came in and they checked in on me, and that completely changed my night. The fact that someone noticed me and wanted to know if I was okay. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time in my life that I felt, and it took me a while to get warmed up to the space, because I was just listening and ask questions. But to be around people that are beginning to soften this external veneer that we have, that can be very slippery, and we don't even know we have it on. And to just start to say, hey, here's where I'm struggling. Here's what doesn't add up to me. Here is where I'm at in my marriage. And to just see the depth of honesty was the first time I've ever experienced that. And it was just jaw-dropping for me. And it wasn't until probably about like 12 at night, 1 a.m, that I started to really talk, because I was like, I am just, what is going on? This is such a different space that I've ever been in, and so refreshing and so healing just to hear people, even though I wasn't necessarily participating vocally. And that is something also that I learned in that space, is beginning to use my voice, which I am slowly, and with this podcast, and I can get into actually why I started the podcast as well, to use my voice to just share where I'm at, because you never know what people might need to hear that can help in some way, shape, or form when you are being more of yourself, which is leading from the heart and not worrying about belonging, but actually caring about your self-expression. And the interesting thing is, when we are leading from our heart, we'll actually belong probably more to more people, because they'll be able to see us more, and it'll actually open up the door for their guard to go down, and then you get to see them a little bit.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So then I'm hearing that you did realize that there was a path that you were going to take or embark on that may be combined with some traditional therapies, but you were going to really take charge of how it was going to show up for you, and in figuring out who you were, what you wanted.
Yeah.
Unpeeling process.
Sure. Yeah. And that's the gift for me. I'm not going to say it's not a magic bullet. It's a tool to access deeper parts for me. And I know that other people, it doesn't resonate with them. They're not interested in that. They have other ways of accessing that for themselves. But for me personally, it has been monumental to just let my guard down so I can actually learn from myself, see my value, understand the wisdom that actually I do have, and begin to trust my own intuition more. And then use that as just practice to realize that, hey, this is who you really are. This is you. And this other part of you that shows up on a daily basis is an aspect of you as well, but it's not fully you. And
it's the mask.
Yeah, it's the mask. And it's designed that way.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, we're this human experience,
Yeah.
It's not to be judged. It's just to be realized, like, all right, we all have our limitations and these pre-programmed defense mechanisms that we come into this world with. And the whole point, I think, of this experience of this Earth School is to continue to discover and transcend these limiting pre-programmed things that life is constantly kind of showing us. And then we have an opportunity, once we see it, that then there's choice, and then choice, there's power. But until it actually becomes conscious, it's gonna continue to drive our life, and we're
you
gonna
don't even look at it. You don't even see it. You don't even know it's there.
Yeah, and we'll call it fate.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and it's so fascinating. You know, I totally understand when you say it was the path you wanted and the tools that you wanted to use. It may not be for others. And as I've thought about that, it's fascinating. I for myself, I've looked at that because there are certain things that Scott has been much more adventurous in and gone into, and I'll be like, that doesn't speak to me, and I'll hold it off. And the one example that I'll share with you has been cold plunging.
Oh yeah.
So Scott got where it was, and he would talk about how painful it was and how difficult and challenging. It wasn't like it was something that he embraced because it was easy to do.
I can't say I love it.
He actually embraced it because of how challenging he found it, because it really helped him go further to the place that he was in resistance than, something else that may have been easier for him to do. So, and at first I'm like, yeah, that's just kind of not my thing. And then I kept being around him when he would do it, and I would opt not to do it. And then finally one day we were getting ready to go to this event, and I told myself, I am going to cold plunge every day. And just hearing myself say that, I started to get so anxious. And I'm like, okay, what is it? What's coming up for you? Why is this so challenging? And there were all sorts of thoughts, first of all, being in a bathing suit in front of others. And then all of a sudden it's going to be really cold. And what if I can't handle it? And I have to get out early. And and all these things of, again, a situation that I could not control. And so I started to notice, wow, it's the situation that I can't control more so than what I may face internally. And so as I worked through those things, getting ready.
I love that insight. That's great.
I started to think, wow, that's fascinating that some of the barriers were less internal than they were my external environment that I'd like to keep just a certain way, the way I could show up and operate in it and be in control. And so that weekend when I cold plunged every time, with the first time I kind of faced all those external factors, and then the internal factors showed up.
Yep.
Because it wasn't that they weren't there. I dismissed them. I didn't even entertain those because there were so many external factors that I kept telling myself that tool wasn't a good tool for me. But it was only when I pushed myself to say, why would that tool not be a good tool for me, did I start to see those limiting factors that were not only present for cold plunging, but it was present in so many aspects of my life. Just so many aspects of my life. And I thought, oh boy, that is exactly why cold plunging is the tool for me. Because it's really helping me face fears that are part of my being, that I live inside that shell. So it's less of just a mask. It's like a whole protective gear that comes with me, and forcing
a little bubble
myself,
of safety.
a little bubble of a little bubble of safety. Yeah. And it was fascinating. And I just remember every cold plunge that weekend, because each one was a deeper layer of myself. And it was interesting because by the third one, none of the external things even bothered me anymore. They were gone because I had to get so prepared for what I was facing in the cold plunge, what was showing up, right?
Was this outside or was this inside?
Outside.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was all outside.
And, you're talking about...
And it was a big crowd.
You're talking about MDMA. She's talking about cold plunging, and it's no matter what it is, whatever that thing is that shows up for you, whatever you're going to lean into, it's like you said, it's a tool. And there's numerous tools that will get us there. So what is the one that makes you feel the most
uncomfortable?
Maybe that's the one you need to
one
look at, right?
That may be the one that has to be among the first, not the last.
Well, and you had this, David, you had this preconceived idea, like you said. You'd taken one puff of cannabis in high school, never drank, never had any of that experience of being, checking out or hiding in that stuff, and had some kind of a judgment or preconceived idea around it. And then all of a sudden, when you finally let go in that experience, it gave you what you needed.
Oh, yeah.
It showed it to you.
Yeah, and it probably was
beautiful.
Among of all the selection of tools, it was probably a tool that had a lot of other things going against it as the first tool of choice.
Well, I had a lot of external fear from outsiders too, right?
Sure.
Their
other people who wouldn't dare do it.
Sure. Well, just like, what
your
do you,
family,
family,
friends.
yeah. I had my sister drop me off.
Are you crazy?
And I said, hey, keep your phone on. If this turns into something else that I did not expect, pick me up.
And don't go too far.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It's really, and I've thought about that because, it's kind of like the macro and micro. We talk about that a lot, that there's always a macro and a micro view of everything. And, it's just like when they talk about the ocean, there's the ocean and then there's every drop in it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
And so cold plunging for me was like that. I in sitting in that tub and calming my breath down, could see the macro and micro view of myself in such clarity while I just survived that. How many minutes?
I think it was.
They were timing us.
Between 3 and 4 minutes, if I remember.
It felt
right.
forever.
Yeah. There was ice in the water, so it was cold.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
it's cold. It's cold.
They brought, you get in the water, which is already cold. They'd had ice in it. And then while you're in there, they came and dumped in like a 5-gallon bucket of
More
ice.
Just to make it dramatic.
Just to make it better.
And there were 3 tubs, right? So that 3 people are getting in and 3 people are getting out, and everyone's standing around watching.
But that's the other thing too, is you got other people in at the same time. So am I going to be the first one that gets out?
Right.
Well, and you had your own tub, but they were all lined up, right? So it was like all 3 got in, and so you're like, I can't be the first one to get out.
Yeah.
And then people are waiting. So there's those that have gotten out and are drying and getting warm. There's others that are waiting, and it was challenging.
What we did is we started playing drums on everybody, and that
Around
kind of
the tub.
distracts you from having to think about any of that stuff. Am I going to get out first or last? It's like, I guess I'm not going to get out until this song is over, right?
Play those games with yourself.
Yeah. So and that was cool because if you've ever done it before, if you play, it was just like a Native American style hoop drum, frame drum, and we were playing right into the back of the cold plunge trough. So it was vibrating right through the water, and you could feel it like magnifies the vibration of the drum through the water into your body. It's so cool. So cool.
But it is each of those things, whatever it is, and everyone is different, right? Mm-hmm. It takes you to that place where starting to know yourself at that deeper level and really asking, how else do these things that I try to control affect my life? Because I viewed it only affecting cold plunging until I decided to cold plunge. And then it was like, oh no, these things show up in many aspects of my life.
The metaphor.
And that's why it became such a powerful tool. But it took me how many years? 2?
Yeah. I mean, you had come and done it in the pond before, but the water wasn't as cold. It wasn't ice water, and we just kind of waded out.
And I did it once in the reservoir.
Yeah.
And it was, but I had never committed to do it every day, and the intensity.
It was much more intentional doing it in the troughs with 2 other people. So there's 3 troughs where you're like in and out, and like you said, everybody
and it's
around
really
and waiting.
cold.
You're not doing it all together. And when we were doing it all together, it was like, when you're ready, you could kind of just get out.
Right. And no one really noticed,
Right.
You could kind of just ease to the side and get out on the beach or whatever. But no, this was intense. So I just really applaud that you took a deep dive into a tool that pushed you the furthest, perhaps.
Yeah.
Right from the start.
Thank you. Yeah, and I've never been shy in sharing my experiences. Actually, I was pretty evangelical after the fact, because I'm like, guys, this was monumental for me. And just, I'm sure people are like, shh, just please be quiet about this. You know, like, yeah, it's probably the same thing when people start cold plunging or do CrossFit or change their diet. They're just, it's all on their mind.
The next new thing, right?
Yes. Yeah. But I wanted to add actually really quick to the macro and micro thing to you. So I play some games with myself because they help me to put perspective into my existence in some ways. So one thing that I'll do is, if I am losing patience with, I have 2 children, and if I am like in this kind of state of like, okay, again, like
ages,
my daughter is 9, my son is 5.
Okay, perfect.
So I love being a parent. It's just this beautiful inconvenience at all times. And
beautiful inconvenience.
So one of the things I think about though is I'm like, okay, and I got a lot of this from Michael Singer, The Untethered Soul, Living Untethered. If you haven't read any of his books, I'd highly recommend it. But he does this wonderful job on beginning to just express the magnitude and the miracle it is that we exist. And you actually concluded to it, Scott, in my episode as well when it came to like the sun and the distance of the sun. But I just think, okay, here I am on this rocky round object that's rotating at over 1,000 miles an hour, that's orbiting around a star. I can feel the heat from this star that's 93 million miles away. If Salt Lake City, I live in Orem, was completely on fire, I wouldn't feel the heat of that fire. But the fact that I can actually feel that warmth from something that far away is miraculous. Yeah. And then on top of that, then that is just one small system of an entire galaxy that we're a part of that is rotating around this black hole. And it's, we have one star that's heating our planet at the right distance, just all these things. I also play this game of, whoa, anything that I'm worried about right now is pretty small.
Yeah.
Right?
Put it in perspective.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And then, and at the same time too, another thing that'll do to really help me get present in if I'm losing my patience with certain things is I say, if my 75-year-old self could come back to this exact moment, no matter how boring, no matter how mundane, no matter how stressed I am, I think I would be, and I had to be back for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour a day. I would be absolutely just loving it, taking it all in, being like, oh my gosh, what am I surrounding myself with? Look at where I was at. And just, so for me, it's just a way to change my view and my perspective on where I'm at and that lens. And usually it helps snap me out of it. And then a lot of times we talk about purpose as what we do, but I'm learning that purpose has more to do with the energy that you show up in whatever you do.
Oh yeah.
And so if I can start to change my energy and my purpose in what I'm doing, then that has a rippling effect on how everyone else shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. Because if you can catch yourself in those moments and either have that perspective to say, what would my 75-year-old self do? Or even just to put it in perspective, like this moment will not be here 2 moments from now. So let me live in this moment, right? And really be present for it. Yeah, that's really beautiful, David. Thank you for sharing that.
There's a song by an artist we really like. His name's Ryan Montbleu. Is that how you pronounce his name?
Montbleu.
And it's called 75 and Sunny. And the lyrics go, I'd rather be 75 and sunny than 25 with a chance of showers all the time.
Ooh.
Isn't that good?
Yeah.
And, when we look at how life is, we really determine how we're going to perceive everything, what life is going to be for us. And I want to be 75 and sunny for sure.
Well, and we just got back from seeing the Eagles in Las Vegas, and it was really pretty funny.
A sea of white hair.
Yes, a lot of people our age enjoying a band that they once knew. But I loved what, which one of the artists?
Was it Don Henley?
No.
Joe Walsh.
It was Joe Walsh.
Yeah.
Joe Walsh said, I am better at 75 in the 20s than I was in my 20s in 75.
Wow.
No, he said I'm better in my 70s in the 20s than I was in my 20s in the 70s.
Yeah, that's right. But it's again just that kind of flipped reflection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And speaking of Michael Singer, Scott and I were talking about this the other day. We've ran into several people who said that we recommend that book all the time. Well, we recommend both of them, but people who are just starting, we tell them all the time to read The Untethered Soul. And we've had several people go, you know what? It was just really hard for me to get into the book.
Yeah, I heard that from my son.
I'm just like, wow, that's fascinating, because that book grabbed me right from the start when he says, who's the one speaking and who's the one listening?
Mm-hmm.
And I just couldn't let go of that thought, all the way through the book.
You'd never even considered that in life until you read that, really, had you?
Well, I had always heard this voice in my head, but I never stopped to think that, like, who is it that's speaking?
Me too.
And I was listening to it, but I hadn't stopped to really put that as deep in perspective as it is.
Yeah. How old were you when you first read that?
Not that long ago.
We were together.
Maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah, it was before 2016.
Right.
It was before
So
Peru. So
10 years ago.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I had a friend recommend that book to me, and I bought it. And this is, 12 years ago, and I read the first chapter, and I was like, "That's really interesting," and I started reading the second chapter, and I wasn't ready for it. I just couldn't see it, and I put it down, and actually gave the book away. Like, I think I donated it, and it wasn't until later on I picked up Living Untethered and the Surrender Experiment.
Oh yeah.
And those really took me.
So you read those first before you went back and read Untethered Soul?
The actually, ironically, I haven't actually finished Untethered Soul.
Really?
Yeah, it's in my Amazon checkout queue, but I have yet to order it because I keep referring back to the Living Untethered.
It's still the same message. It's just like the beginning of the experience was what came from the Untethered Soul, and this is like next level.
And the Surrender
Experiment
is just such a beautiful story of his life. We read that immediately after we finished Untethered Soul.
All good.
And then he wrote later Living Untethered.
Mm-hmm.
But it was,
One thing I really respect about him, though, that is different compared to other spiritual teachers is he did not take a conventional route where he had no intention on being a CEO of a major software company at all.
No goals.
No goals. It was basically,
it
just unfolded. And so to me, he has this real world experience that's really relatable to maybe the average person with versus someone who has been in a monastery for most of their life and, has these amazing insights on life. But I often, for me, the whole thing is how relatable is this person to my day-to-day
How
life?
practical is that for the real world, right?
Yeah, and so his message has rung true to me.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I learned more about being present with his books because he lived so present. Once he decided to drop out of getting his PhD, which, he then eventually does, but it just has to show up in a very present way. And the way he moves from building homes to purchasing real estate, it was just like he was always present with those decisions and sometimes didn't even know why they were coming to him.
Mm-hmm.
And then it all, as he looks back on his life, it's like, oh, I see the picture that it's painting. But while he was living it, he was just in each and every moment.
So this is a glowing recommendation from all three of us to read those three books.
Yes.
Other words. But one place I wanted to go, David, before we, we're into this a bit, but we have time, and I'm curious about before the MDMA experience, before you went into that, what were the things, I'm sure there were probably multiple things that were kind of steering you in that direction?
To get help?
To get help, where was that coming from? If you're willing to share.
Totally.
Because
the more spiritual journey.
That's the place that a lot of people are in right now. They know something's going on, but they don't really know what. And so for those people who are in like the beginning stages of their journey, they maybe have not read the Untethered Soul or any of those, but they're feeling like there's something needs to change here. What drove you to that? What was the fuel to that, I guess?
Sure. That's a good question. So a couple things that I was coming back to, which was, how am I distracting myself? What am I numbing out with? So for me, it was porn. And for me, it was shopping. And it was, and the porn use for me was starting at a young age, around 11, 12. And it had to do a lot with not feeling like I'm not desirable. And how do I, and being raised LDS, not like having a lot of anxiety around girls and not wanting to quote unquote mess up or do anything with girls. And so that drove a behavior for coping with these uncomfortable feelings. Rather than looking at them and talking through them, I would hide behind this behavior. And for me, all it did actually was increase my anxiety. It actually didn't help it. You know, and I've learned this recently. We often think that we're avoiding hard feelings by distracting ourselves, but all we're doing is perpetuating the feelings because we're not facing them.
Yes.
Right. And they, in some ways, are getting bigger.
Totally. Yeah. And so, you know, utilizing pornography up to that point was just a way for me to not face a lot of my own insecurities and being truthful to myself, truthful being to my wife. And there was that aspect. And then also just not ever, just feeling really ramped up, like very frustrated with where I was at all times. Even when things went well, it would, my excitement or lust for life was dimming more and more and more. And I'm like, this doesn't add up. And, you know, advertisements are telling me this one thing. When I get this one thing, there is, this shot of dopamine. There's this shot of excitement of something novel and new that I can incorporate in my life and have for a moment.
Temporary. But
it's always temporary, you know? And so I can continue down this chase of wanting this quick hit. You know, the way I put it is, you know, this fast food type of processed excitement. And now it's, well, what do you actually want to start to admit to and start looking at? And I can see why that can be difficult for a lot of people, because they might hear, this is an analogy my father-in-law gave me and I love. He's like, I know and I can hear that there's a buzzing, like bees are in the attic, but I don't want to poke my head up there to see how big the hive's gotten.
I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
I love that.
And so from that, a lot of people, you know, will be like, yeah, I have one client, great guy, younger, and he's like, I would love to start going down this path of self-discovery. I'm really interested in potentially using psychedelics because I am so in control or want to be in control of everything. But I'll tell you why I'm really resistant to do it. My fear and my anger is what fueled me to get to where I'm right now. And if I start to soften, I'm afraid I'm going to lose all of my ambition and all of the things I've worked so hard to control to get to this point. And what happens if I lose that? And I always challenge back. I said, that's just one perspective. What if, as you actually loosen your grip and let go of whatever stories and narratives that you have, it'll actually free up a lot of energy and space inside you, so you have even more ability to create far more than you're capable of.
Right, with less stress.
Yeah.
It's like the magician who has the spinning plates. We heard this in the movie yesterday, the Bob Dylan movie. You're spinning the plates, but you've always got to come back to them and keep them spinning.
Mm-hmm.
You can never walk away from the plate. It's not self-perpetuating. You can't just walk away from it. Whereas the things that are you do that are in flow, it's hard to conceptualize that you could do something from a place of creation in a calm and beautiful aligned space to who you are. It's what you've been told, what you think needs to be I need this thing. I need that thing. This is the amount of money I need. This is the house I need. This is the car I need. This is the boat I need. This is the wife I need. And then all of a sudden you have this realization that I'm spinning plates. Yeah. I can't do this forever.
Yeah, one thing I love about meeting so many people over the years and doing their hair is I've met a lot of quite successful individuals, and to see them when they're married, when they're getting a divorce, and when they're single, and to just see that process unfold as they begin to, their lives are unraveling in certain ways, but they're letting go of a lot of baggage. And some, like one particular person I'm thinking of right now, beautiful big house. From an outsider's perspective, you're like, they have the world at their fingertips. They've made it, you know, and pulling into her, you know, just realizing I can't stand all this stuff. It's such a distraction from who I actually am, because I have to maintain it all. I have to constantly be managing all this stuff to keep up this facade of success, and it's no longer working for that person.
Right.
And realizing like, yeah, now I'm living in a townhouse that is a fraction of the size, and I'm absolutely loving it, because it's almost like this weight is off my shoulders that I just don't have to constantly be wondering in, you know, how am I going to pay my bills, or I got to get this, you know, I got to either decorate this room or clean this area of the house or whatever. And so it's just simplifying. And for me, and if that's someone's goal and they love a big home, that's great. There's nothing wrong with material possessions. I just would love to ask the question is, you know, are these your dreams, or are these dreams that have been sold to you?
Right. And if they are your dreams, great.
Yeah. Go with it.
You know, go with it. And we're not putting a damper on anyone's experience of having stuff or things or any of that. But what is that energy? Mm-hmm. Just exactly like you said. Feel into that. What's the reason behind everything?
Yeah, and I don't know if that would be a very comfortable thing for people to feel into, because that might mean, from people looking in, my life might start to look very chaotic, and we might lose a few things here and there. And how are people going to judge me? And so often, the next question is how often are we doing things based off of how we want to be perceived by other people?
Yeah, right.
For sure.
We, our good friend Hugh Vail says, you don't know what you have until you have it under pressure. And that feels to me like the kind of thing that we build. We build a career with all these demands. Like the only way to advance is longer hours at work, or more pressure, or taking on more projects, or if I get an increase, then all these things are now expected of me. And it builds this pressure pot that we live inside. Mm-hmm. And suddenly everything that was part of that, at some point we reach a point of pressure where we say this isn't sustainable. And then as you let it go, it's like, now who am I really? Who am I? What part of me was always in there, was always part of that? And the ambitious part may always be there, but it may show up very differently when you let things go and you start that reconstruction in a much more intentional way, to say, when I get to abundance, whatever that looks and feels like for me, when I get to abundance, I'm going to get there with a very different roadmap, so that I enjoy the journey and love where I'm at. And this will be now abundance. And it can still be all the material things, or the career and all of that. But a lot of people just architect it very differently than when they first come out, and they have so many external voices that are helping that narrative, or contribute to the narrative that they feel they have to keep up with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing what you shared.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't know that we've ever had this conversation or not, if we've ever talked about this or not, but porn is one of the things that I've struggled with in my life.
Oh, really?
For a long period of time. And there's another podcast that we're starting to produce that's unfolding, and it's me. I'm 63, mm-hmm. and it's my friend Cody, who's 46, and then his son, who's 22. And
wow.
all three of us have had this in our as part of our lives and things that we've been working through. And it's each of our perspectives about everything, really, because it's a boomer, a millennial, and a Gen Z.
Yeah.
And all three of those perspectives about those things. But because we've all struggled with, I say struggle, that's not even the right word anymore. I don't even use that word anymore. Because we've had an experience with our
Porn has been a
relationship
teacher.
to porn.
It's been a teacher.
Our teacher, porn. We each have a perspective of that we're super open about sharing. And it's not designed, I don't think, for everyone, but it definitely is designed for people who have that experience in their lives. So I'm saying this so that you are aware of that. I'm also saying this because if you're willing,
sure, I'm an open book.
Come on back, because that's
sure.
That's
yeah,
what
I'd love to share.
Right now, we're just doing episodes. We've done 3 episodes so far. We're not releasing anything yet until we have a bunch in the can. But we're talking. That's where it all started. The first episode, it was like we opened the door, and here it is. This is what you're going to get. And then we've talked about other things as well, but we are looking for people like yourself, who that's been something in their life, to talk about that experience. Let's shine a light on this instead of pushing it over there in the corner where it can't be seen, and bringing it to a place of understanding from all perspectives, not just a man's perspective, but all perspectives. What is it that happens in that experience with the person who's experiencing it, but also the consequences of that experience and how that affects your partner and your children and your family and all of those things. And I get to sit here and witness this, father and son. It's all unfolding on the spot. They've not really had these conversations with each other. They've both known about it with each other, but they haven't really had these conversations. And I get to sit here in a sacred space and witness these two guys sharing that. Well, I get to give my perspective, and it's super cool.
Good for you. That's amazing. Yeah, I'd love to come on if that's an opportunity. I'll take it.
We're gonna tease that up a little bit, because that's something that's coming fairly soon. We're just waiting and letting it unfold however it needs to unfold. But
thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and so with where you're at now and what you've been doing, there's a few things that you've done beyond the MDMA. So let's go back to that place, if you don't mind, and just
wherever you want to go.
Let's just go there a little bit, and then we'll move towards conclusion.
Great. What else do you want to know right now?
So you did the MDMA experience. You went through COVID, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And then you then did some other psychedelics, we know, because we've talked about this. And was that just taking you deeper, or where has that led you to, and what maybe took you to the place of where you are now, with the podcast
and the desire to start a podcast?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the other psychedelic I've done is psilocybin, or mushrooms, magic mushrooms, and that has been a quite a different experience for me compared to MDMA. MDMA, they call it a heart opening drug. But psilocybin was my first one that had more visuals to it, and it was just very internal. And actually, it wasn't until I had that psilocybin experience that I really start to appreciate music on a whole new level, and how much that can affect what's going on inside me. And I just had some really great breakthroughs with just reconnecting and understanding, like, oh my gosh, I have insight that is really, really great. Because up until that point, I was riding off the coattails of a lot of other people.
Sure.
Because my mentality is, well, I'm not, the core belief is I'm not good enough. So therefore, there are people that are better, that are smarter, that have done more research, etc.
And I need to listen to them.
And I need to listen to them and adopt their stuff and regurgitate their information, which I still do to this day. I mean, like that's a part of it. But the big thing that it's helped me do is start, and I'm just in the starting phases of this too. Sure. This has been something my wife has been really pointing at me and showing, and I really am wanting to do this, is how much of this that I know or that I am reading, that I'm digesting, that I'm taking in every day, am I actually embodying? Am I actually practicing? And so when I've done these experiences, it actually shines a little bit of a light on, oh, I actually do know a lot of this stuff. I do hold it in me. Mm-hmm. And now the trick is not to grasp onto it like I can't lose it, but use that as a little bit of a North Star to then just say, all right, I know that that's in there, and I can always refer back to that, but also what do I want to do to move forward from that space? And so psilocybin has been something that actually spurred the podcast, because a year ago I was in this very agitated state where, because of COVID, it actually did a lot of things for me, where when everyone else was kind of in this, we don't know what we're doing, taking more time off, or just in this limbo state, it actually allowed for me to relax a little bit, because I didn't feel like I was falling behind in some way.
Right. Everybody was falling behind.
Everyone was falling
time.
behind. Yeah. And so then, as great as this is, my kids were really little at that time. I was like, okay, my kids are only little for so long. Let's not focus so much on the intensity of work, and let's just say, let's just keep things going and do well at what we do, but I'm not going to push anything. I'm not really going to get out of my comfort zone too much, so I can focus my attention on them. And my wife was going through a lot of health issues and whatnot, and so that was something I wanted to focus my attention and energy on as well. But what I didn't realize until recently was how much was I hiding behind those stories to actually start to look at my own stuff and be more expressive and move into a place that I felt was more me. Because I was like, ooh, because of this circumstance, I'm going to put my needs and wants and desires on the back burner. And then at some point I'll get around to doing it.
Right.
And once things were doing that long enough and things were starting to shift, I had to start facing that. Do I want to create a new excuse to now push it off more? Or do I actually want to start looking at it? So then that's when I used psilocybin as a way to tap into myself a little bit more. And what came through in that was, you need to start using your voice. And when I heard that, I immediately was reflecting just before that experience on why I chose hair. Hair was something I knew nothing about, but it was recommended to me through some interest and personality tests. I ignored it for 7 years. I kept meeting people were referring it to it. And it finally, once I actually decided to do it, I loved it. I finally found something that fit for me, and it was amazing. And it was a choice that I made. And it wasn't because someone, because it sounded like the best thing for me. It was just like, I've tried all these other things. I've done college. I've started a career. Everything's fallen flat. But I'm going to just try this other thing that keeps showing up. I don't know. I don't have a plan B. This is it. And in that moment, it just was so amazing for me. Mm-hmm. And so as I was reflecting on the simplicity of hair, I'm like, I talk to people every day. I ask questions every day. I love learning, and I love just hearing people's stories. And I love the simplistic format. I mean, it can be obviously a huge production if someone wants, but it's just something very raw. And I love the unfiltered, just the unfiltered nature of it all. And so when I had that thought just leading into that psilocybin experience, but didn't give it much. And then when it said you need to start using your voice, immediately I was like, oh shit.
Now what?
Now I guess I've got to do a podcast. And I was so resistant. That's exposure. I don't share my opinion. What will people think? I don't know anything about podcasting. I'm middle-aged. Like, what's my relationship with being a beginner? Not very good. My ego does not like that, and so that's when I was calling you guys, I'm like, okay, Scott and Loray have been an inspiration because they have started this podcast. I've enjoyed listening to it.
And we're a lot older than you.
And you are, and you are older, and it was something that I'm like, man, it seems like they're having a lot of fun. And I just I need something like that in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I was imagining all of the barriers more than the opportunities get in the way.
Yeah, I love that.
And so once I talked to you guys, I mean, I sat on this for 8 months, 9 months, and just the pressure kept building and building and building. And I bought some equipment, and I'm just humming and just like, I don't know. And in those moments, because I wasn't moving, I wasn't present with my kids. I was just, I stagnant might not be the best word, but frantic inside. I couldn't ever really be at peace because there was something inside of me that was like, when are you going to move on this? And so once I started, it was, and I don't want to use the word try because try to me is a 3-letter word for fail. It's like, just start, because it's going to be bad. It's not going to be great, but that's the whole point. And people actually really enjoy they enjoy following you through the process. But do I want to follow me through the process is the question.
Wow.
And that's where a lot of humility and things come up. And the initial reason why I wanted to start was, what's my relationship with being a beginner? Not very good, apparently. And number two, this is going to be a way for me to start to move through my fear of the unknown. But more importantly is, I'm telling my daughter and my son's still a little young for this, but my daughter has anxiety. And every day I'm like, hey, let's talk about a way that you are moving through your anxiety. And so many things in her life are new. And I'm here to kind of say, like, be her little cheerleader and to share with her, my experiences. But my experiences that I'm sharing are when I'm her age, not me as a 40-year-old, as her dad. Well, how important and impactful can that be that, hey, just because dad's an adult, I still have a lot of these things coming up. And let me give you an example. I'm starting this new project I know nothing about. And I'm scared, but I'm going to try it. Oh, I'm going to use that word. I'm going to start this thing, and I'm going to talk to you about it. And I'm going to talk to you. Hey, guess what? Today I invited a friend over. He's really busy, and the whole podcast went great, except for it didn't record. And I didn't realize that until after the fact. And I felt helpless. I felt panicked. And that same day I had 2 more scheduled, and I didn't know why it didn't record. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do? I canceled one. The other one is a remote one from Hawaii. And so just kind of sharing her my experience that I had this moment that was really frantic and scary to me, but in the end it's turned out. And I didn't give up. I pivoted, and I thought on my feet, and eventually it turned out just fine. I explained to my friend. He totally gets it. I was apologetic, but also, I had to own certain things of the fact that I'm human. And when my kid can start to see that I am human just like them, to me, I think that is where a lot of strength can be found.
Yeah.
Oh, David, I love that. That's
being vulnerable
amazing.
in front of your children. I mean, we were never taught that, and our parents didn't teach that. That wasn't taught to them.
Sure. This
is a fairly new dynamic, and I think it's important for people to hear, because showing that gives them permission. It gives them safety. It doesn't give them fear and trepidation.
Yeah.
It gives them safety. Oh, well, if dad is struggling with this, I can struggle with, my spelling or, something that brings up anxiety in a child. I love that. Mm-hmm. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's beautiful, because it also helps them to learn to rely on themselves. You know, because they realize, wow, I just have to start. I just have to trust myself. Dad's doing that. And you kind of lose that perception that dad's going to save me or someone's going to save me. It's like, I have to trust myself. Mm-hmm. I love that.
Yeah. Great. Well,
tell us what's on the horizon with the podcast.
What's on the horizon?
Yeah.
So, that's unfolding. It's this whole new project, but a couple people that I'm really excited about, that one of them is going to be released this week. He it's the first legal psilocybin or magic mushroom therapy clinic and it's in Provo, which is 7 minutes from my house.
Wow.
I've heard about this. I don't know anything about it, but I've heard about it.
And I had him on, and one of the things that, I just want to be able to start expressing like, hey, this is something that's really been helpful for me. And I just want to start to open up that dialogue. There's a lot of dialogue around it still, and there can be some stigma, but my whole thing is there's plenty of avenues that people can take, but if this has some sort of interest to you, there are very safe ways of doing it.
Yeah.
Right.
And if someone is interested, like I'll be more than happy to share like the places, and I want to expose places. I mean, this is legal. It's a legal place. And so a lot of times people are so afraid, well, it's not a legal drug. Well, there's actually ways that people have done it so that it is completely legal for you and you're safe to do it if this is something that interests you. So I'm going to be releasing that episode this next week. This one woman, actually, she came in as a client. She works specifically with women who have been in the midst of infidelity from their husbands, and she uses neuroscience and yoga as a way to help reset the nervous system. And so I try and pick guests that have some sort of tie to me in some way, because in her eyes and stuff like that, pornography is a part of infidelity, and so I wanted to learn something from that, and I know that I'm not alone in. And I can see how much that has damaged my relationship personally. And so how can I share something that has been a personal struggle, but also options on how to maybe move through it in some way? And that's the gift I want to try and give to myself, is use this as a platform to get contact to people and create relationships, but also, hey, if someone's feeling stuck, here's a potential option for you. And just I just love the opportunities that are coming. Like, for instance, I'm in talks right now with the gentleman that started that clinic. I said, I think it would be really powerful. What if we document what it looks like to go through your clinic? And I'll be your subject.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Just so that people can start to view in and say, okay, maybe this isn't as scary as I thought my imagination was imagining. And wow, okay, like here's a guy that is really wanting to feel more in his life and can have a difficult time feeling, but why is he bawling right now? Is he in pain? No, he's actually just in so much love and wanting this so badly for other people. To me, that has a lot of power.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Yeah, it is.
I love that.
With the work that you're doing, I mean, and the number of people that you're meeting and what you're doing and the conversations that you're having, it's like you have this built-in conveyor belt of people coming through, and you've got to hear just fascinating stories that all of a sudden it's like, would you be willing to be on our podcast?
Yeah, some of them are clients. Others are, former clients or people that we just know in the community based off of our experiences over the last, decade or more. And the thing that I want to suggest to people too is there's a lot of wonderful people that are so close to you that you might not realize.
Right.
They offer a tremendous amount of wisdom and insight. And I would just say, if you wanted to begin to just start asking questions, deeper questions, and people will start to answer those things and really like you. And, one of the guests I would love to have on that I've yet to reach out to and I hope to have on, it's a guest of these 4 friends from college. They had no idea what they wanted to do. And everyone was telling them what to do. Go to grad school, get a master's degree, go to law school. None of that felt right. So what they ended up doing, they bought one of their parents' RV, painted it bright green, and booked interviews with people that they thought were interesting. They said, we don't want a job. We're not looking for anything from you. All we want to know is your story. And how did you get to the position that you're in? Because you seem like you're living life. And we don't know what we want to do. And they did that all summer, traveled across the entire country. And people would give them maybe 15 minutes at the beginning. Like, hey, I'm busy. I'll sit down with you for 15 minutes. 2 hours later, they're still talking.
Yeah.
Wow.
And to me, it was early podcasting. It was 20 years ago that they were doing this. Mm-hmm. And then they created a company called Road Trip Nation. And so then they decided, you know what, there's got to be other people that feel the same way that we do when they graduate college or they're feeling a little bit lost. So why don't we start encouraging others to do that? And we're going to sponsor them to do that in their own hometown, or to sponsor them to do their own road trip, to call up people that they don't really know, but they're interested in what they do because that person seems fascinating to them. And that's what I did. That's what I did when I did hair. I knew nothing about it. I called up someone and I utilized their resources 17 years ago. I said, hey, I'd love to do a road trip. I'm interested in doing hair, but I don't know anything about it. So I'm just going to call up these people. At the time I was living in Idaho, and I drove down here and I interviewed 3 people. 2 out of those 3, one ended up being my mentor and boss for 8 years after the fact.
Wow.
That taught me everything that I know about hair and allowed for me to have a successful business. The second is the hair school that I ended up going to, the owners, and now I still cut their hair, their son's hair. So to me, just those 2 interviews alone have made major impacts on my life.
Wow, that's so cool.
And so when I start to think about that, well, when I have a platform that I can start to have discussions on a weekly basis with people, how much impact will that have on my life in the next 10 years? What other opportunities like this that I'm sitting in your living room are going to come up and allowing me to start to experience life on a whole new level that wouldn't have been available had I not started?
Beautiful.
Thanks.
That's really wonderful.
That's flow right there, because you didn't have a preconceived idea of how it was going to be. You just felt an intuition of how this might unfold.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it's shifted and gone back and forth in different ways as it has unfolded.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still becoming something, right?
Oh yeah, it's never ending.
So, and it always will be unfolding. And I mean, that's what we try and talk about, and it's what we try and practice in our lives all the time, is living in that space.
And that it's reciprocal, that it's not something that you have this ambition towards, that you're like, oh, this is what I'm going to do with the podcast, that it's got to make this much money. You start putting all these expectations around it. And instead you're like, no, I want to start this. I want to create a platform where I learn from someone, they learn from me. It's this reciprocal relationship. It's this conversation. And every single person has something about them that is valued and worthy of knowing.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a beautiful message for everyone, every single human being, that may wonder, well, I could never be on. We have asked people to be on the and they're like, why would I be on the podcast? Like, I don't have a story. And we're like, oh, yes, you do. And sometimes we have to help them see their story. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's, I'm just so happy that you're doing it.
Thank you.
I love your energy around it. I think your enthusiasm and commitment to it is so authentic, and it's just fabulous, David.
Thank you. My word for the year is notice. And to me, it has multiple meanings. So to notice means you have to be present. And also, if I notice someone else, to me, that's an act of love. And so as we begin to notice other people's value because they have a story that we're interested in, you never know what that impact's going to have on them.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, David, this has been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you
for
so
having
much.
me.
Thank you for coming to our home and being here.
Yeah.
It's been perfect.
I'll come back anytime.
Okay, good. We're going to hold you to it.
I want to listen to that podcast with the guy from the Provo Clinic. So when that comes out, let me know.
It'll be out this week.
I want to hear that one.
Okay.
That's interesting. So, okay. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We'll see you again soon, honey. Till next time.
Bye.
If you're enjoying the Observatory Podcast, please consider subscribing, sharing us, and if you have time to write a review about something that may have affected your life or helped you in some way, please do so. That helps us to get the word out and get this information out to more and more people so that it can be shared and we can help ripple out this energy that's emanating in the world today. There's been so much separation, and we want to find a way to create conversations where we can come together, not divide so much as we have been, to learn to come together in unity. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Observatory Podcast.
Please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes.